Welcome to 24 News Channel. Let to show you about the hot news that has been taking around the world.
A long-awaited U.S. list of Russian businessmen and officials who have flourished under Vladimir Putin's presidency appears to be mainly a list of people in Russian government, along with 96 oligarchs from a Forbes magazine ranking of Russian billionaires. The list, ordered by Congress in response to Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential campaign, had induced fear among rich Russians that it could lead to U.S. sanctions or being informally blacklisted in the global financial system. But the U.S. surprised observers by announcing that it had decided not to punish anybody under the new sanctions, at least for now. Some U.S. lawmakers accused President Donald Trump of giving Russia a free pass, fueling further questions about whether the president is unwilling to confront Moscow. Russia hawks in Congress had pushed the administration to include certain names, while Russian businessmen hired lobbyists to keep them off. In the end, the list of 114 Russian politicians released just before a Monday evening deadline included the whole of Putin's administration, as listed by the Kremlin on its website, plus the Russian cabinet, all top law enforcement officials and chief executives of the main state-controlled companies. A companion list of 96 oligarchs is a carbon copy of the Forbes magazine's Russian billionaires rankings, only arranged alphabetically. It makes no distinction between those who are tied to the Kremlin and those who are not. Some of the people on the list have long fallen out with the Kremlin or are widely considered to have built their fortunes independently of the Russian government. Officials said more names, including those of less senior politicians and business people worth less than $1 billion, are on a classified version of the list being provided to Congress. Drawing on U.S. intelligence, the Treasury Department also finalized the list of at least partially state-owned companies in Russia, but that list, too, was classified and sent only to Congress. The idea of the 7-page unclassified document, as envisioned by Congress, was to name and shame those believed to be benefiting from Putin's tenure, as the United States works to isolate his government diplomatically and economically. Every top Russian official except for Putin is on the list of 114 senior political figures. Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev is on it, along with all ministers from the Russian government, all 42 of Putin's aides, and top law enforcement officials. The CEOs of all major state-owned companies, including energy giant Rosneft and Sberbank, are also on the list. The oligarchs list includes tycoons Roman Abramovich and Mikhail Prokhorov, who challenged Putin in the 2012 election. Aluminum magnate Oleg Deripaska, a figure in the Russia investigation over his ties to former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort, is included. Less obvious names on the list include Sergei Galitsky, founder of retail chain Magnate, and Arkady Volaz, founder and CEO of the search engine Yandex, and bankers Oleg Tinkov and Ruben Vardanyan. They have been lauded as self-made men who built their successful businesses without any government support. Some billionaires on the list have fallen out with the Kremlin entirely, like the Ananyev brothers, who fled the country last year and vowed to sue the Russian government after their bank was declared bankrupt. The publication of the so-called Putin list angered and dismayed many in Moscow. The list shows that the United States views the entire Russian government as enemies. Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov, himself on the list, told reporters on Tuesday. Although he said Russia should not give in to emotions before studying the list and its implications carefully, Peskov pointed out the name of the law on countering America's adversaries through sanctions. De facto, everyone has been called an adversary of the United States, he said. The Kremlin also indicated that it didn't view the U.S. administration's announcement that it would not impose any new sanctions on Russia for now as any sort of reassurance. Peskov said administration did say new restrictions might still be imposed later. In a Facebook post Tuesday, Konstantin Kozyshev, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee for the Federation Council, the upper chamber of Russian parliament, said U.S. intelligence failed to find compromising material on Russian politicians and ended up copying the Kremlin phone book. Kozyshev criticized the U.S. government for harming Russia. U.S. relations, saying that the consequences will be toxic and undermine prospects for cooperation for years ahead, adding that the list displays political paranoia of the U.S. establishment. Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who came to prominence thanks to his investigations into official corruption, tweeted on Tuesday that he was glad that these people have been officially recognized on the international level as crooks and thieves. Navalny in his investigations has exposed what he described as close ties between government officials and some of the billionaires on the list. The list's release was likely to at least partially diffuse the disappointment from some U.S. lawmakers that Trump's administration opted against targeting anyone with new Russia sanctions that took effect Monday. Under the same law that authorized the Putin list, the government was required to slap sanctions on anyone doing significant business with people linked to Russia's defense and intelligence agencies, using a blacklist the U.S. released in October. But the administration decided it didn't need to penalize anyone, even though several countries have had multi-billion-dollar arms deals with Russia in the works. State Department officials said the threat of sanctions had been deterrent enough, and that sanctions on specific entities or individuals will not need to be imposed. Companies or foreign governments that had been doing business with blacklisted Russian entities had been given a 3-month grace period to extricate themselves from transactions, starting in October when the blacklist was published and ending Monday. But only those engaged in significant transactions are to be punished, and the United States has never defined that term or given a dollar figure. That ambiguity has made it impossible for the public to know exactly what is and isn't permissible. New York Representative Eliot Engel, the top Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, lambasted the move to punish no one, saying he was fed up and that Trump's administration had chosen to let Russia off the hook yet again. He dismissed the State Department's claim that the mere threat of sanctions would stop Moscow from further meddling in America's elections. How do you deter an attack that happened 2 years ago, and another that's already underway? Engel said. It just doesn't make sense.